Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the scariest thing you saw whilst on the inside? Not me, but a teacher of mine told me a story of one of her students that spent a week in juvie. He wasn't there for more than 2 days when a gang of boys attacked him, sliced his back up with razors and raped him. No one knew until they came to release him, and his mom put a hand on his back, only to hear him scream in pain because of all the cuts on his back. I spent a day in country jail, the same jail where a family member worked at for a while as a lieutenant. It was his retirement job, meaning easy work. When you get into country, they give you a wristband with your full name and a barcode on it. For that 20-something hours I did everything I could to try to hide my last name, because it is very distinctive and the same as my family member. Exco here. Sorry if I'm not the target audience. Scariest thing I saw while working in a maximum security prison was this simple looking middle-aged man who seemed nice at first, but was obviously very much insane. I was doing my rounds and he wanted to talk, so I talked to him for a while, not knowing what to expect. I was working in A Bay that day, which is for housing general population, and C Bay is the mentally ill population. This is important. I started talking to this guy and he introduced himself to me, and I told him my name and he started telling me he was wrongly imprisoned as he did nothing wrong. I said, what do you mean? And he said he was arrested for something he didn't do, and now he's here. He looked like a sad lonely white man, but average in every way. He could very easily be a cashier at a tractor store or something similar. Anyway, he started talking about his sister and how he loves to fuck her and come inside her, and this is where things start to get uncomfortable for me. He then starts telling me more about his sister and how she is mean to him and is jealous of him and how she beats him sometimes and she's mad at him for not wanting to have a baby with her. I don't like talking to him, so I try to make an excuse to leave, but then the weirdest part of the conversation happens. He starts the conversation over completely from the beginning. He tells me his name and asks me mine, and I'm looking at him confused but tell him my name again anyway. He repeats the same story about his sister word for word, and yet again I try to leave, but he starts the conversation over again. He does this 3 more times before I just walk away, and he's still talking. Later in the day it's shave time, so I have to go around and give razor blades to the inmates who want to shave their faces. Afterwards I go around again and collect the razors and I think I'm done, but I go back to the same man and I notice he is holding a razor in his hand. I told him he needs to give me the razor now as shaving time is over, and he said he can't because he's not finished yet. I told him he was done shaving his face and to please give me the razor, but he said he's done with his face but wasn't finished with the razor. He slid it through the bars and pulled back when I tried to take it from him. He was acting like a child with a toy and like I was a parent who wanted him to give me the toy. I held my hand open and demanded he give me the razor, and he kept saying, no, I'm not finished yet. Keep in mind I was 19 at the time and he was 54, I think. I had about enough of his bullshit, so I very firmly said, give me the razor now or I will go get another officer over here. He looked upset and promised to give it back when he was done, and he wouldn't be long, he just had to get the chip and the dirt out. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, he's innocent, and then I saw his arm where he was cutting into it. He said someone put a microchip in his arm and he has to get it out. He also said the chip was dirty and he had to get rid of the bad vein where the chip was. As fucked up as it was, I watched this man slice into his wrists, then put the dirty razor blade under a vein and pull it out of his arm. Imagine pulling up a guitar string about a foot into the air, but it was bloody. I stared at it. He stared at it. And then he let it fall back into his arm like it was nothing. He didn't seem to have any pain from it either, and his facial expression looked pleased. I had a mini freak out, but kept my cool and went to get my other officer to come get him before he did any more damage. I waited there while 2 officers came and escorted him to C Bay, where he should have been from the beginning. As he was walking away, he started the conversation over again, and the last thing I heard him say before he rounded the corner was, I fucked my sister. Some things they can't prepare you for in these places. My uncle spent time in and out of prison for most of my life. Not a bad guy, just makes terrible decisions. He told me once that his entire pod went into lockdown and the guy in his cell started to have epileptic seizures due to the stress. I guess this guy had a history of crying wolf and guards were in no rush to assist him. He ended up choking on his vomit and dying in the cell with my uncle watching. Guy laid on the floor for an entire night before anyone came in to check. Not me, but one of my dad's friend was in jail and said he saw an inmate shit into his pillow. I saw a mentally challenged person, not able to understand simple commands, be beaten with flashlights until their eyes popped out. We were in release processing, and the gates were broken. We were told to stay inside the cells. No one wanted to fuck up, because we were about an hour from being let out, which they do in batches. This guy had someone he knew in the cell across from his. He kept trying to go in there. The guards kept putting him back, and getting more and more pissed. The inmates were getting mad too afraid that he would fuck up the release schedule and several people started threatening the dude. I could see by the glaze in his eyes that he had not a clue what was going on except he wanted to see his friend. The last time he walked out the cell door, inmates were screaming for the guards because no one wanted the release fucked up. 6 sheriffs came and beat the fuck out of the guy. He had getting pounded with a flashlight with his head on the concrete. Boom. 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 Then an eye popped out and everyone started screaming, but the pounding continued. Boom. 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 Other eye flies out. It definitely fucked up the release and we all stayed another 36 hours while they cleaned it up. I've been incarcerated for the past 3 years, still am in a work release, and the scariest thing I've witnessed by far, when I was the main prison I saw a dude get beat across the head with walkie-talkies and dragged into solitary confinement. A few weeks later, when he got out, we were in the rec yard. He was playing basketball and collapsed. He was gushing blood out of his mouth. We were then told to return to out dorms. FDLE, Florida Department of LA, came, snapped some pictures, picked up his body and left. Nothing at all happened afterwards. Officers kept walking the compound with complete immunity. I saw a guy keep scratching his arm until it bled. Then he took heroin and put it inside the wound. Because he didn't have a needle, it was completely fked. He was doing it in the courtyard, under the camera so the camera couldn't see him. I hope never to see anything that fucked like it seemed like he would do anything to get that heroin into his bloodstream. Early 90s. My dad was a prison sergeant when I was a small kid. I remember a long period of time where he was not allowed to kiss us or be close with my mom, sister and I. I found out years later it was because an inmate who was HIV plus intentionally cut himself and tried to infect nearby officers during a fuss. They practiced extreme caution while my dad was getting checked every few months to make sure he didn't contract the disease. Fortunately he was not infected. Not prison but juvie. I was there waiting to go to a mental hospital and the other girls tried making me block the cameras while they beat up a snitch. Turn out their mutual friend was the real snitch and they became BFFs. That's not the scariest though. They also took turns seeing who could deep throat a banana the farthest. But they used the same banana. This isn't my story, but my uncle, we'll call him M. Now M went to jail for possession of heroin. He was addicted to it at the time he went to jail. He was in prison for almost 2 years. Now M had friends who were in jail before, so he knew to stay out of the way and out of sight. One day a new inmate was brought in. He was put in the cell right next to my uncle's. Immediately when this guy was brought in, hostilities went up fast. Everyone glared at this guy. M noticed everyone was glaring or threatening this guy. My uncle M asked around as to why everyone hated this guy, confused as hell. Turns out the guy was a child molester who was serving a life sentence because he raped and then murdered a young kid. One night M wakes up to the sound of beating. He can hear all of this from his cell. One of the prison guards had let himself in. They beat the pedophile up. As my uncle was in there he saw and heard this guy be beaten, tortured and even raped. He didn't say anything because he believed the guy deserved it. My uncle cares a lot about kids. My uncle left and he heard on the news years later. The pedophile hung himself while in jail. Years of torture got to him. As my uncle says. Okay. So I got a DUI in a neighboring county. I was going through a rough patch in life, so I said fuck it and never showed up to court. I figured catch me if you can. Well, fast forward a couple months and I end up getting into some shit and charged in my county. Boom. Extradition. I end up in that neighboring county's prison. Rough stop to put it lightly. So one night I'm in my cell, which was on the second tier, second floor, and they bring some new guy in. Well, this guy keeps asking for shit. Phone calls, food, and just generally being a pain in the ass. So at one point a co comes up to talk to him. The co leaves and this guy is freaking out. He's screaming and yelling and banging on the door to his cell. He called me a in asterisk asterisk asterisk. He just keeps screaming this, and the banging intensifies. It's now boom 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 with him still screaming. Now, when the doors are closed and locked, there's about a 2-inch gap between the door and the wall. That's what he was screaming through. I see a co walk up, and here he called me a and I who the co had walked up, waited for him to scream, and sprayed mace down the man's throat through the crack and just walked away. So for the next 45 minutes I can hear this guy gasping for air. It didn't sound good. They finally came back, drugged him out of his cell and down the hall to this little shower. They cuffed him to the shower and ran water on him for a couple hours, gasping the whole time. They finally ended up taking him to the hospital.